In this video, we're going to go through the Key Stage 2 reading paper from the 2019 SATs. So we can see from the cover of the reading booklet that we have 3 different texts and we'll need to answer questions on each of these. So what I like to do first is open the reading booklet and then spend just about 20 seconds scanning the first text. First, we can read the title, so that's the park. Then, if we have an introduction, we can read that next. So, AJ has just arrived at Joe's house before school. Joe's mother is the warden who looks after the local park. Then, once we've read the introduction, we can have a look at the pictures. So we can see a park with its gates boarded up and a sign saying under development. So already we can see that this story is about a park that gets closed down. Now, rather than reading the text straight away, what I like to do after reading the title and introduction and looking at the pictures is to go to the answer booklet and look at the first question. We have, what is AJ doing when the post arrives? So let's start reading the text. We know from the introduction that it's before school, and our first sentence is, AJ was just about to tuck into his tea and toast dripping in sour rhubarb jam when there was a loud clatter from the letterbox as an important-looking brown envelope landed on the mat. So the post has arrived, the envelope has come through the letterbox, and AJ was just about to tuck into his tea and toast when that happened. So we can answer the first question. You get the mark for any reference to eating or eating his breakfast, and below that we have some examples of ways that you could answer this question. Question 2. How does Joe know that the letter contains bad news before his mum tells him what it says? So let's go back to the text and keep reading. Bit early for the post, isn't it? Mum said. Oh, it says special delivery. Mum opened it and unfolded the letter. Joe knew instantly that something was wrong. He could see it on Mum's face. So, Mum hasn't said what's in the letter, but Joe can see it on Mum's face that something is wrong, meaning that he can tell by her expression. Perhaps she has started to look worried. So here we get the mark for any reference to seeing it on her face. Question 3. What does the letter in the brown envelope tell Joe's mother? So we've already looked at the picture, so we can guess that the letter will tell Joe's mother that the park is being closed down. But just to be sure, let's keep on reading. What is it, Mum? Joe asked. Yeah, Mrs. P, what's happened? AJ asked too. It's the park. They've shut it down. So we know that they've shut the park down. So we get the mark for any reference to closing the park. Question 4. Look at page 4. Find and copy one word which shows that Joe is angry. So let's keep on reading until we get to the part where Joe gets angry. For a second, no one said a word. Joe and AJ looked at each other, then back at Joe's mum. Her face was pale, her jaw dropped open. She stared at the letter, her eyes watery and ready to spill over with tears. Shut the park, Joe said furiously. They can't do that. It's the park. So we have our answer. Even if we don't know what the word furiously means, we can still guess that it means angrily from what Joe is saying. So the word furiously tells us that Joe is angry. Question 5. Look at page 4. In AJ's opinion, how do people feel about the park? So here we probably want to look for AJ saying something. And if we read our next sentence, we have, yeah, everyone loves that place, AJ joined in. So that place is of course the park because that's what they're talking about, and AJ thinks that everyone loves it. So we get the mark for any reference to everyone loving the park. Question 6. Look at the paragraph beginning, "You boys best get to school," to the end of page 4. But what about, Joe started to say. Which words would best complete Joe's question? Tick 1. We have your breakfast, our games, your job, or our homework. Now we already know from the introduction that Joe's mother is the warden who looks after the park, so your job looks the most likely, but let's keep reading the text to make sure. "You boys best get to school or you'll be late," said Mum, her voice all shaky. But what about, Joe started to say. So there's the sentence we need to finish, and let's keep on reading to see if we have any clues further down the page. "You leave that to me. I don't want you worrying." Mum tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. If she was trying to reassure Joe, it wasn't working. He knew his mum needed that job. So there's our answer. Joe knows that his mum needed that job, so he's trying to say, but what about your job? So we can tick your job, and although we know that Joe is eating breakfast, they haven't mentioned Mum's breakfast, and games and homework haven't been mentioned at all, so we can rule out the other possible answers. Question 7. What is Joe's mother thinking after she reads the letter? Tick 1 thought. Now for this question, we need to infer. The text doesn't directly tell us what Joe's mum is thinking, but it does give us lots of clues. You might have already realised that Mum is upset, and she is trying to hide this from the boys, but it's not working. Joe can tell that she's upset. So, "I don't want the boys to realise how upset I am" seems like our best option. So let's look at the text for clues that Mum is upset and doesn't want the boys to realise this. So here we have "something was wrong, he could see it on Mum's face." So we know Mum is upset. Then we have her eyes watery and ready to spill over with tears, and her voice all shaky, which also tell us that she's upset. But how do we know that she's trying to hide it from the boys? Well, she says, "I don't want you worrying," and then tried to smile. So she wants them to think that she's okay. And then at the end of the page, we have Joe's mum just nodded, turning away to wipe her eyes. Why does she turn away? Well, we can infer that she doesn't want the boys to see that she's crying. So, "I don't want the boys to realise how upset I am" is our best answer. "I'm happy that the boys have finished their breakfast" is wrong because Mum is not happy at all. "I'm worried the boys will be late for school" is wrong because although Mum does say, "You boys best get to school or you'll be late," this is really only because she wants to hide how upset she is from them. The reason Mum's voice is shaky, the reason why she's wiping tears from her eyes, is clearly not that she's worrying about them being late. It's because she's lost her job and she's upset. And for this last one, there's no reason to think that Mum is thinking about cooking sweet and sour spaghetti. Question 8. If she was trying to reassure Joe, it wasn't working. What does reassure mean in this sentence? So we can quickly scan the text and find the sentence. So that's this sentence here. And it often helps to read the whole paragraph, because the sentences before and after can often help us guess what a word means. So we have, "You leave that to me, I don't want you worrying." Mum tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. So what is Mum doing here? She's trying to make Joe feel better, telling him not to worry and trying to smile. Then, if she was trying to reassure Joe, it wasn't working. So reassure Joe means make Joe feel better or less anxious, but it's not working because Joe is still concerned. So here we get the mark for any reference to making Joe feel better or feel less anxious. Question 9. Look at the paragraph at the top of page 5. Find and copy one word that shows the boys do not want to leave the house. So let's find the paragraph at the top of page 5. We have Joe and AJ grabbed their bags and reluctantly headed out of the door. Neither of them said anything for what seemed like ages. So they've left the house, but which word tells us that they didn't want to leave the house? Could it be grabbed? Well, no, that just describes how they picked up their bags. But could it be reluctantly? They reluctantly headed out of the door, and headed out of the door just means left the house. So reluctantly is describing how they left the house. So even if we don't know what the word reluctantly means, we can guess that it means without wanting to. So the word reluctantly shows that the boys do not want to leave the house. Question 10. Oi, AJ yelled. What are you doing? Joe read the sign. Under development. What's going on? Joe asked. Why have you closed the park? Joe and AJ react differently to seeing the man hammering in the sign. How does Joe react? So we could go back and read the text, but for this question we don't really need to, because they've quoted what AJ and Joe say. So with Oi, AJ yelled, what are you doing? We can see that AJ is quite rude. He yelled and said Oi rather than say excuse me. But with Joe, we have what's going on? Joe asked. Why have you closed the park? So Joe is not yelling, so we can say that he is calmer. Joe is not ruder. AJ is the one who sounds rude. And Joe is not less interested or less worried. He still wants to know why the park has been closed and he's concerned. Question 11. Look at the sign from the story. Who has produced the sign? So produced means made. We need to know who has made the sign. So let's look at the sign and see who is mentioned. Under development, this notice hereby declares that St George's Park is closed with immediate effect, and that from the 1st of July, this park will be redeveloped and a new block of luxury flats will be built. The Department of Progress. So who is mentioned? St George's Park is just the name of the park, but the message is signed off at the end with the Department of Progress. So that will be our answer. Question 12. Look at the paragraph beginning underneath the notice was a to the end of page 5. What is happening inside the park straight after Joe and AJ have read the sign? Well, let's read the text. Underneath the notice was a drawing of a posh building, tall and made of glass. It had pictures of smiling people chatting and drinking coffee outside. Joe and AJ looked through the park gates and could already see diggers moving in, ready to tear the playground apart. So what is happening inside the park? Well, they're looking through the park gates, so at the inside of the park, and they can see diggers moving in. So we get the mark for any reference to the diggers or builders moving in, or to the playground or park being destroyed. Question 13. So this is our last question on this section, and the last question often requires you to look at the whole text rather than focusing on a specific paragraph. So it starts using information from the text. That means look at the whole text because the answer could be anywhere. So the last question might not be about stuff that happens at the end. Here it's about the whole text. and we need to tick one box in each row to show whether each statement is true or false. So first, the park has been looked after by a park warden. That's true because we can remember from the introduction that Joe's mother is the warden who looks after the park. That's written right at the top up here. Now, the park is going to be replaced with a shopping centre. If we remember, the sign told us that it was going to be replaced or redeveloped with a new block of luxury flats, not a shopping centre, so this is false. Now, building work in the park will start at the end of July. So, July is a proper noun, it has a capital letter, which makes it easy for us to scan the text for the word July. And we might spot that July is mentioned on the sign. St George's Park is closed with immediate effect, and that, from the 1st of July, this park will be redeveloped. But the 1st of July is the start of July, not the end of July, so this statement is false as well. And finally, the warden had 2 weeks' notice of the park's closure. The warden is Joe's mum, but she didn't get 2 weeks' notice. She didn't find out about the park closing 2 weeks ago. She's only just found out now, so that's false. But this is a difficult question, and especially for the last question in a section, if you can't find the answer quickly, sometimes it's better to move on and come back to it. You only have 1 hour to complete the whole paper, so you need to move on quickly. Also notice we were able to answer all of the questions here, even though we didn't read the whole text. We skipped some bits on page 5. Now I wouldn't recommend skipping parts of the text, but if you're a slow reader and it's taking you a long time to get through the paper, sometimes that can be a good strategy.